Elmwood Cove was the kind of suburban neighborhood that families often dreamed of: neatly trimmed lawns, sidewalks lined with dogwood trees, and well-kept homes in earthy tones. A decorative sign at the entrance read, "Welcome to Elmwood Cove," as if heralding a serene haven. The Elmwood Cove Homeowners Association, HOA, prided itself on preserving this picture-perfect image, crafting thorough rules for landscaping, fencing, and communal property upkeep. At the neighborhood's heart stood the Elmwood Cove Community Center, a single-story building used for everything from holiday parties to yoga classes. Attached to one wing, in a little-known initiative, was a small hospice facility offering palliative care for terminally ill residents. A modest arrangement, it had a handful of rooms where those nearing life's end could spend peaceful hours close to home, with visiting nurses and volunteer caregivers. The arrangement was unusual for a suburban community center, but years earlier, a philanthropic resident had endowed the wing, hoping to spare families from lengthy hospital commutes. Overseeing the building's operations was the HOA board. Most recognized the hospice's quiet value. It gave families a calm, intimate space for final days. But in the board's ranks lurked Brenda Alcott, known privately as Karen. Middle-aged, rigid in posture, and set in her ways, Karen often boasted about maintaining high standards. She scoured the community for perceived eyesores, unapproved paint hues, stray yard gnomes, or leftover holiday lights. Over time, she escalated from petty enforcement to more invasive meddling. In the coming weeks, Karen would turn her sights on the hospice wing, decrying it as an inappropriate use of community resources. Initially, few guessed she'd do more than rant. But soon, her obsessive drive to control every detail of Elmwood Cove would push her into an unthinkable act, targeting some of the most vulnerable neighbors. And from that heartbreak, a new wave of solidarity and improvement would arise, overshadowing her cruelty. Within the community center, the hospice wing occupied a back corridor, 3 small rooms, a common area with comforting decor, and a quiet reading corner. Staffed by rotating volunteer nurses from a local care organization, it offered short-term care for residents in advanced stages of illness who chose to remain near loved ones. Families visited daily, bringing homemade soup or crocheted blankets. A sense of gentle dignity permeated the wing, which seldom saw more than a handful of patients at once. Despite its low profile, Karen had begun voicing concerns at board meetings about the image of having a hospice in such a family-oriented neighborhood. She argued it might depress property values or create unpleasant reminders of mortality. The board, uneasy, insisted the hospice was discreet, provided essential support, and had operated with minimal disruption. Karen's calls to relocate or shutter the wing found little traction, but she persisted, scanning for a wedge to force changes. Staff and volunteers occasionally overheard her snide remarks. They found her attitude insensitive, especially toward families already coping with terminal illness. Meanwhile, some residents showed deep appreciation for the hospice, noting how a neighbor's final days had been eased by the convenient, compassionate setting. If not for the hospice wing, those families might have endured stressful hospital commutes or lacked local palliative options. Tension quietly simmered. Karen's repeated demand, "We need that space for more profitable uses, like an expanded gym or childcare facility," struck staff as heartless. She also complained that the hospice door was unattractive, lacking the center's uniform decor. Ms. K, the lead nurse, who maintained the wing's serene environment, tried to avoid direct conflict. But a handful of visitors whispered that Karen had been seen scowling near the entrance, as if searching for a reason to barge in. Something ominous brewed beneath her veneer of community standards. During an HOA meeting, Ms. K attended to update the board on the hospice's modest budget, mostly covered by the philanthropic endowment, not the HOA. She explained they required no special fees from the association, just the usual shared utilities. Ms. K also described plans to repaint the corridor in soft pastels, which might bring the hospice in line with the rest of the center's color scheme. She hoped that might appease Karen's aesthetic complaints. Karen, however, pressed further. "We should do a cost analysis on how this wing impacts the community center's image. Some families might be uncomfortable with a hospice on site." Another board member, Mr. Donovan, retorted that many found comfort in having the hospice. Ms. K gently noted that the wing caused no disruptions. Karen sniffed. "We'll see." Outside the meeting, Ms. K overheard Karen muttering about how the hospice door had a depressing sign reading Palliative Care Wing, and that such signage doesn't suit a family-friendly area. Ms. K shuddered at the casual disregard for patients' dignity. She confided in a volunteer, worried Karen might stir trouble. The volunteer shrugged. "She always threatens. The board seldom sides with her. Don't worry." Yet Ms. K remained uneasy. Karen's tone seemed more personal, as if the very existence of the hospice offended her sense of control. Meanwhile, an elderly resident named Mr. Halley was admitted, battling terminal cancer. His children visited daily, grateful to have him close. The staff embraced them, ignoring Karen's undercurrent of hostility. Soon enough, that hostility would escalate from verbal disapproval to a vile act of sabotage no one anticipated. Karen's next step was to propose reallocating the hospice wing to a different property outside Elmwood Cove. She assembled a short memo claiming that the community center needed more space for events, that the hospice's presence was off-mission, and that external agencies could provide palliative care elsewhere. She emailed the board, urging them to vote on ending the arrangement. The board responded coolly. Ms. Duval, the HOA president, pointed out that years ago, the association had accepted an endowment specifically for a small hospice presence. The philanthropic donors will mandated it remain, so removing it might risk legal complications. Also, it served only a few patients at a time, hardly interfering with the center's normal usage. Karen argued that the community's needs had evolved, that a daycare or expanded fitness center would better serve more residents. But Ms. Duval concluded the matter by stating the hospice was not up for discussion. A frustrated Karen left the conversation, her eyes sparking with repressed anger. In the hospice corridor, Ms. K and staff sensed Karen's repeated attempts to uproot them. They felt relief that Ms. Duval blocked the measure. But Ms. K worried. If Karen's official channels failed, might she turn to more underhanded tactics? She recalled rumors about Karen's meddling in past controversies. Each time the board or community overruled her, she'd escalate. Ms. K warned volunteers to keep an eye on suspicious activity near the hospice. The staff locked the corridor at night, though none expected someone might physically tamper with a door designed for patient comfort and dignity. Yet, late in the next week, Ms. K's fear proved warranted. Under the cover of darkness, Karen would commit an act that crossed every boundary of decency, aimed directly at the hospice's most vulnerable patients. One quiet Wednesday night, the hospice wing housed just 2 patients, Mr. Halley, heavily sedated for comfort, and Ms. Quinn, a frail widow with advanced heart failure. A night nurse and volunteer caretaker took shifts in a small break room. The main entrance to the hospice, a single door from the community center hallway, remained locked after hours, but from the inside it was easily opened. Rarely did outsiders come around late, except staff or visiting family. Around midnight, Karen arrived stealthily. She wore dark clothing, gloves, and carried a small tube of industrial-strength adhesive. She had timed her approach to avoid the center's front desk staff. Only the hospice corridor might have a nurse. Karen reasoned if she glued the outside edges of the door, it would jam shut. This, she believed, would highlight how the hospice was unfit for a public building. If staff or visitors had to break the door to enter, it'd cause a scene, fueling her narrative that the hospice was problematic. Carefully, Karen spread thick glue around the door's perimeter, focusing on hinges, latch seams, and cracks. She pressed it in place, waiting briefly for it to set. Then, with a surge of twisted satisfaction, she hurried off. The entire sabotage took minutes. She didn't realize or care that her act risked dire consequences if staff needed to bring in emergency help for a patient in crisis. Inside, Ms. K dozed lightly at the break room desk, unaware that beyond the corridor, their exit was being sealed. Mr. Halley snored softly in his sedation. Miss Quinn lay in a calm doze. The night passed quietly. No immediate crisis arose, so the sealed door wasn't discovered until morning, when a volunteer tried to exit for supplies and found the handle immovable. By dawn, staff realized the door was glued from the outside. Anxiety spiked. If an emergency had occurred, they'd have been trapped. Furious phone calls flew to Ms. Duval. Suspicion fell squarely on Karen. The sabotage was beyond petty. This threatened patient welfare. As the community reeled, Ms. Duval and Ms. K promised a thorough investigation. Meanwhile, the unstoppable wave of indignation from neighbors soared, demanding swift action to protect the hospice from further sabotage. But no one predicted the innovative security upgrade that the sabotage would precipitate. Word spread like wildfire. Karen must have sealed the hospice door overnight. Neighbors reeled at the sheer cruelty. Even those who'd once found Karen's vigilance beneficial felt appalled. This wasn't about minor yard violations. It was a deliberate act potentially endangering terminal patients and staff. Ms. Duval convened an emergency HOA board meeting, with Ms. K invited to share details. The hospice staff recounted how they discovered the door jammed at morning shift change. Maintenance had to pry it open, finding hardened adhesive in the frame. Ms. K's voice trembled, describing the near catastrophe if a medical emergency had arisen. Ms. Duval and the board members were livid, some calling for an immediate police report. The sabotage, though lacking direct eyewitnesses, had Karen's hallmark. She'd repeatedly sought to dislodge the hospice. This was the final, vile escalation. Karen feigned ignorance, claiming she had no knowledge of the door's sabotage. She insisted it might be a random vandal. Few believed her. Ms. Duval threatened a formal censure if evidence emerged linking Karen to the crime. Meanwhile, neighbors demanded that the hospice corridor be better secured. Ms. K seconded that, explaining how staff or emergency personnel needed reliable, unimpeded access. Any sabotage threatened lives. An idea arose. Install advanced automatic sliding doors with card or code-based entry, plus reinforced frames to prevent tampering. These specialized doors, used in hospitals, would deter glue or jam attempts, since no external handle or hinge was accessible. The board hesitated, citing cost, but neighbors insisted they'd raise funds if needed. The sabotage was so egregious that community outrage overshadowed budget concerns. Thus, ironically, Karen's sabotage led the board to consider a high-tech solution that would firmly secure the hospice wing. The next step was finalizing a plan. Ms. Duval vowed to expedite it. All the while, Karen faced mounting suspicion, though no direct evidence pinned her legally. She could only watch as the community rallied to make the hospice door sabotage-proof, guaranteeing her meddling would never again endanger patients. Days after the sabotage, Ms. K and Ms. Duval met with a local security solutions company to discuss automatic sliding doors, the kind often seen in hospitals, with integrated access control. These doors, operating on sensors or passcodes, would remain locked from the outside unless authorized. They'd be more expensive than a standard door, but the cost was small compared to ensuring patient safety. The initial quote ran around $8,000 to $10,000, depending on whether they installed a backup power source and additional security cameras. The board was hesitant about tapping the HOA reserve fund, but Ms. Duval recognized the potential liability if sabotage recurred. She also saw the moral imperative. The community would be outraged if the door remained vulnerable. Additionally, neighbors offered donations. Some families who'd benefited from hospice care in the past felt compelled to chip in. Ms. K believed that bridging any budget gap with philanthropic help was feasible. Karen, incensed, tried complaining about industrial-looking doors spoiling the center's aesthetic. But Ms. Duval dismissed her stance, pointing out that after gluing the door shut, they needed a tamper-proof solution. Karen denied the sabotage, calling the new door overkill. The rest of the board recognized that the community demanded strong measures. Ms. K prepared an itemized plan, a sliding door with a sensor that triggered upon staff's ID badges or a nurse's passcode input, plus a small backup battery to ensure it functioned during power outages. The plan also included an overhead camera to record any suspicious nighttime activity. Word of this advanced solution excited the hospice staff. They realized that with automatic doors, no malicious person could forcibly seal them from outside. Ms. K said it was a hospital-grade fix. Freed from sabotage fears, staff and families could focus on patients' comfort. The entire fiasco, though horrifying, might yield a safer, more modern facility. The final step was the board's formal approval, which they expected at an upcoming emergency meeting. Karen's sabotage ironically propelled a state-of-the-art security upgrade, far beyond what the hospice originally needed. The HOA called a special meeting to vote on the hospice door upgrade. The sabotage, though unproven, weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Ms. Duval laid out the official quote: $9,500 for the sliding door system, including an overhead camera, sensor locks, and minor structural modifications. Ms. K confirmed partial funding from private donors, lowering the HOA's portion to around $5,000 or $6,000. She stressed the moral responsibility to protect terminally ill patients. Karen, the lone skeptic, repeated arguments about cost, claiming the hospice was temporary usage, unworthy of major investment. Another board member retorted that the hospice had been operational for years, with no plan to shut it down. Ms. Duval pointed out the sabotage had forced the board's hand, referencing numerous neighbor complaints demanding action. One member read aloud heartfelt letters from families praising the hospice and condemning the sabotage. After a brief debate, the board voted 4-1 in favor of installing the automatic sliding doors. Karen cast the lone dissenting vote. The audience, including Ms. K and some volunteer nurses, cheered the decision. Ms. Duval promptly scheduled a timeline with the security company, aiming to complete installation within 2 weeks. They'd also add a new motion-activated camera in the corridor to discourage further tampering. The senior staff privately breathed relief. Karen glowered, arms folded, as neighbors congratulated Ms. K. In a stinging twist, the sabotage Karen orchestrated had not only failed to oust the hospice, but spurred the board to enhance it with state-of-the-art technology. No manual door could be glued shut again. The HPC staff soon prepared for the installation, aware it would cause some short-term disruption but yield a far safer environment. The community largely embraced the plan, from seniors who visited the hospice's reading area to younger families who recognized the moral stand. Karen retreated, overshadowed once more by the unstoppable tide of compassion and practicality. Soon after, a team from the security company arrived at the community center, hauling boxes of specialized door tracks, tempered glass panels, and electronic locks. Ms. K cooperated, arranging minimal disruption for the hospice's daily operations. Patients were temporarily moved to the lounge area during drilling hours, ensuring no one felt distressed by the noise. Some volunteer nurses joked that Karen's sabotage ironically introduced a hospital-like upgrade. Halfway through installation, a snag occurred. The existing corridor walls needed reinforcement to support the door's overhead track. Additional materials and labor were required, pushing the cost slightly higher. Ms. K worried about the shortfall, but Ms. Gardner, leading a small philanthropic group, raised extra donations swiftly. Seeing the genuine value in preventing future sabotage, donors pitched in eagerly. Karen, hearing of the cost increase, crowed that the board had miscalculated. She repeated claims that the exorbitant project was forced by a single questionable incident. Ms. Duval ignored her. The rest of the board recognized the sabotage was real and the cost was necessary. Within a few days, the wall bracing was complete. The sleek sliding door system was tested, gliding open smoothly when staff punched in a code or swiped a keycard, remaining locked otherwise. Finally, the overhead camera was installed. The digital feed connected to the center's front desk. If anyone suspicious lurked near the hospice door at night, staff could see it. The HPC staff exhaled relief. No more sealed doors, no risk of a sudden blockade. The sabotage had ironically catapulted them into a new era of modern security. While Ms. K found it sad that such measures were necessary, the resulting safety comforted her. The hospice wing was now better protected than ever. One sunny morning, Ms. K and Ms. Duval gathered staff and families for a brief ribbon cutting in front of the newly installed sliding door. The sleek glass panels shimmered under overhead lights. A small control pad to the side allowed authorized staff or visitors to open it with a code. Ms. K gave a short speech. "We're grateful for the community's unity in safeguarding our most vulnerable. This door represents our commitment to compassion, even in the face of adversity." Volunteers and nurses applauded. A few patients' family members also attended, relieved that no further sabotage would threaten their loved ones. Ms. Duval ceremonially cut a tiny ribbon taped to the door frame. The glass panel slid open silently. Inside, the corridor remained the same gentle, pastel hallway, but now with a sense of fortress-like security. Staff gave a short demonstration. showing how the door remained locked to outsiders unless they had the code or a staff pass. The overhead camera quietly monitored the scene. Karen, presumably lurking somewhere, did not appear. People whispered about her probable fury. Some half expected her to ambush the event with fresh complaints. But none came. The sabotage fiasco had left her with no moral ground to hamper the hospice. Freed from her meddling, Ms. K and her colleagues resumed their comforting routines, checking on patients, soothing anxious family members, and ensuring each day's transitions were smooth. At day's end, Ms. K found time to reflect. Once, the hospice door had been a simple push door, easily tampered with. Now, it was arguably the building's most secure entrance. She marveled at how a hateful act spurred wide-scale improvements, ironically benefiting the same facility Karen wanted to eject. Sometimes adversity truly did yield unexpected blessings. Following the new door's completion, the neighbors rallied around the hospice wing more than ever. Some organized monthly meal trains for families visiting patients. Others crocheted blankets or offered rides for older relatives. The sabotage had awakened a protective streak in Elmwood Cove. Residents realized the hospice wing served real needs, providing end-of-life comfort close to home. Over coffee one morning, Ms. K found Ms. Duval and Ms. Gardner discussing how to further integrate the hospice wing with normal community center activities. Perhaps a small memory garden near its windows or volunteer youth reading sessions for patients open to gentle company. Freed from fear that the wing might be forcibly closed or sabotaged, staff considered more ways to brighten patients' days. Karen, ironically, found herself pushed aside. She tried lodging petty complaints about unapproved decor in the hospice corridor, but Ms. Duval brushed them off, referencing the wing's specialized status. The new automatic door made it impossible for Karen to spontaneously barge in or tamper with the interior. Her negativity no longer impeded operations. Carl, an older neighbor with a disability, praised the new door as user-friendly. No turning handles, just a sensor or passcode. Another neighbor confided they might consider using the hospice if their ailing mother's condition worsened. Ms. K felt relief. The sabotage fiasco was fading into memory, overshadowed by the well-protected, well-loved facility. Families no longer worried about midnight disruptions or locked doors in an emergency. While the hospice remained a quiet place, it buzzed with renewed acceptance from the community at large. Ms. K often locked up at night with an easier mind, knowing the automatic door and overhead camera deterred any future sabotage attempts. All that remained of Karen's campaign was the memory of a vile act that inadvertently spurred a transformative upgrade, forging deeper empathy among neighbors. As months passed, Karen's isolation deepened. Friends she once had in the HOA grew distant, wary of associating with someone widely believed to have endangered terminal patients. She rarely attended board meetings, skipping most in fear of sideways glares. A few times, she posted on the community forum about random violations like overgrown shrubs or late trash bins, but residents dismissed her fuss. The sabotage had made her moral standing untenable. Some rumored she might move away, but her house never listed. Perhaps she felt too attached to controlling the community. Another rumor suggested she was waiting for the next board election to reclaim influence. But her tarnished reputation made that unlikely. Ms. K, hearing these gossip tidbits, felt a mix of pity and relief. The hospice staff no longer felt overshadowed by Karen's watchful presence. One day, Ms. K encountered Karen by chance in the main hallway. Karen eyed the new automatic door with a resentful glare, but said nothing. Ms. K mustered a polite hello, which Karen barely acknowledged before hurrying off. Ms. K realized that she no longer felt threatened. The building, in a sense, had become sabotage-proof. And that knowledge freed staff to focus on patient care, not on fending off meddling neighbors. Meanwhile, Elmwood Cove's sense of communal pride soared. The sabotage fiasco was retold occasionally, how a hateful act spurred an advanced door system, ironically improving conditions. Some found it comedic. Others recognized it showcased the best in neighbors stepping up after tragedy. As for Karen, her meddling fervor had nowhere to go. She remained physically in Elmwood Cove but functionally exiled, overshadowed by the unstoppable compassion that had triumphed. Within the hospice, Ms. K and her colleagues resumed their gentle routines, managing pain relief, comforting anxious relatives, or facilitating quiet final conversations. Patients came and went, some staying briefly, others for extended care. Freed from sabotage concerns, staff channeled energy into making each room extra warm and personal. Families brought cherished photos or mementos, confident no outside meddler would disrupt them. Occasionally, Ms. K arranged small, milestone celebrations for patients who wished to mark birthdays or family visits. The new secure door allowed them to host gatherings without fear. Volunteers decorated the corridor with pastel streamers, guests scanned a code to enter, and the entire hallway glowed with intangible kindness. The sabotage fiasco, once a menacing cloud, was overshadowed by daily acts of tenderness. The board remained supportive, channeling leftover donations from the door project into minor hospice improvements, fresh paint, better furniture. The philanthropic endowment that first established the wing also recognized the staff's resilience, awarding a small bonus for supplies. Ms. K used some funds to host staff training sessions on advanced palliative techniques. In each step, the hospice's standing in Elmwood Cove grew more solid. Karen's sabotage ironically cemented the wing's acceptance. No one dared question its presence after witnessing the scandalous attempt to sabotage it. The entire fiasco, thus, functioned as a cautionary tale about misguided aggression turned into communal solidarity. Ms. K found quiet gratitude in that. She often thought, from evil, good can emerge if neighbors stand firm. By early autumn, Ms. K mulled expansions to the hospice lounge area. She consulted Ms. Duval about possibly repurposing an adjacent storeroom. The staff could create a small grief counseling nook, offering families a private corner to gather or speak with a counselor. Ms. Duval liked the idea, seeing it as a natural extension of the hospice's mission. They approached the board for informal feedback. The board, still riding high on the community's praise post-door upgrade, reacted favorably. The meltdown over Karen's sabotage had ironically improved the wing's standing, making the board more open to additional developments. They recognized that with minimal cost, they could transform the storeroom into a comforting space, outfitted with soft chairs, tranquil lamps, and a supportive environment. Karen, hearing rumors, attempted to muster resistance, claiming the hospice was spreading further into the community center. But her prior sabotage overshadowed her arguments. Board members no longer took her slippery slope claims seriously. Ms. Duval politely noted that the hospice expansions complied with the philanthropic arrangement. Neighbors, hearing Karen's dissent, shrugged it off as more negativity from someone who'd forfeited moral authority. Ms. K proceeded to draft preliminary plans, calling for some volunteer interior decorators. Meanwhile, Ms. Gardner offered to donate a few paintings for the lounge. The entire atmosphere blossomed with renewed faith in the hospice's future. Freed from sabotage and negativity, they ventured beyond the original dream. They'd create not just a safe entrance, but a comprehensive place of solace for families navigating life's final transitions. If Karen's sabotage had sought to break them, it ended up fueling an unbreakable wave of progress. Despite being largely sidelined, Karen made one last desperate attempt to reignite the hospice controversy. She compiled a community poll. She circulated door-to-door, phrased to stoke fear. Do you support expansions to a facility that houses terminal patients next to areas where children play? She emphasized claims that seeing funeral arrangements or mourning families might traumatize kids. Many neighbors refused to sign or found the language manipulative. Some reported that Karen pounded on their doors, demanding they read her statements, only to leave when they objected. Ms. K, discovering Karen's poll, sighed. She recognized the old fear tactic. The hospice staff had always maintained a discreet, respectful environment, separate from typical children's events. The corridor was quiet, with no bizarre displays. The main community center halls still bustled with normal family activities. The notion that kids would be scarred by the hospice's presence was fear-mongering. Indeed, many families welcomed the chance to teach compassion. When Ms. Duval learned of Karen's poll, she wrote an open letter clarifying that no major expansion threatened the building's usage. The storeroom was seldom used anyway. The hospice wasn't pushing out any children's programs. The letter concluded, "We stand by the hospice mission and condemn misinformation. Our community fosters empathy for all, including those in their final phase of life." Many residents praised the statement, effectively neutering Karen's petition. The poll flopped. Only a handful of signatures emerged, mostly from acquaintances who disliked medical stuff near them. The board dismissed it as inconsequential. Karen's last ploy fell flat. Meanwhile, Ms. K and Ms. Duval carried on, finalizing the lounge area conversion with unwavering neighbor support. The sabotage fiasco had taught them that attempts to undermine the hospice only strengthened communal resolve. Construction on the hospice lounge proceeded swiftly. Volunteers painted walls in soothing pastel hues, installed plush armchairs, and placed gentle lamps in corners. The completed lounge felt warm and homely, a place for families to gather quietly while loved ones rested in adjacent patient rooms. Staff pinned up a small bulletin board for condolence messages or words of encouragement. Ms. K, personally testing the chairs, found them comfortable enough to encourage restful reflection. To celebrate, Ms. Duval and Ms. K organized a small lounge ribbon cutting, akin to the door unveiling months prior. Families who'd lost relatives in the past year, or whose loved ones were currently receiving hospice care, were invited. Some teared up seeing how the community center, once threatened by sabotage, had turned adversity into deeper investment in compassion. Ms. Duval gave a short speech praising the unstoppable spirit that overcame maliciousness. The lounge was named after the philanthropic donor who started the hospice arrangement decades earlier, the Wilson Comfort Lounge. Karen, though presumably aware, did not attend. A handful of neighbors suspected she was fuming from her poll's failure. Meanwhile, the crowd applauded the new lounge's unveiling. Ms. K felt a surge of pride. The sabotage had ironically fueled widespread empathy, leading to multiple improvements. The automatic door system protected patients from intrusion or tampering, and now a lounge offered families respite during tough times. In the hush that followed Ms. Duval's speech, the sense of communal unity soared, overshadowing any leftover negativity. Life in Elmwood Cove resumed a gentle pace. The hospice wing functioned smoothly, with staff logging each visitor via the automatic sliding doors, ensuring calm, safe operation. Ms. K introduced a rotating schedule of volunteer musicians who played soft tunes in the lounge. The new door, once the direct product of sabotage, now welcomed loved ones with a quiet whoosh, embodying the gracious environment the hospice championed. Karen's attempts to rally opposition repeatedly fizzled. The final straw came when she confronted Ms. Duval publicly in the community center hallway, complaining that the lounge invites more sad mourners lurking around. Ms. Duval promptly told her to desist, warning she'd face a formal censure if she continued harassing staff or families. A passerby overheard and gently escorted Karen away, admonishing her for her insensitivity. Neighbors rarely saw Karen around the center afterward. They suspected her bitterness prevented her from acknowledging the wonderful improvements her sabotage ironically spurred. Freed from her meddling, Ms. K and the staff quietly thrived, focusing on what truly mattered, providing compassion at life's end. As autumn leaves turned gold, the hospice corridor bustled with gentle energy. Patients' families came daily, opening the sliding door with a code or staff assistance, assured no glue or sabotage would hamper their visits. Volunteers from local churches or civic groups dropped off flowers. The pond behind the center shimmered under the crisp sky, as though reflecting the community's brighter spirit. With the holiday season nearing, Ms. K and the staff planned a small Thanksgiving reflection in the lounge. They invited families, volunteers, and a few supportive board members for a short ceremony acknowledging life's fragility, yet celebrating communal warmth. Candles flickered in the corridor, casting soft glows on the pastel walls. Ms. K read a poem about gratitude for each day. Some families shared how the hospice allowed them precious final moments with loved ones. Ms. Duval joined, reaffirming the HOA's support. She singled out Ms. K's leadership through adversity. When sabotage threatened your daily operations, you responded with unwavering grace, leading to a safer, more modern hospice, Ms. Duval said. Polite applause followed. Ms. K, emotional, nodded in thanks. She recognized that the sabotage, while vile, had forged deeper bonds among staff, neighbors, and the board. No sign of Karen. If she lingered, it was unseen. The event concluded with mild refreshments. Attendees parted with subdued joy, each carrying a deeper appreciation for the quiet corner of Elmwood Cove where compassion reigned. In private reflection, Ms. K found it surreal that Karen's attempt to shut them down or hamper them had catalyzed so much expansion. Indeed, the entire fiasco was an unwitting catalyst for improvement. By midwinter, the sabotage fiasco seemed a distant memory. The new door and lounge had become staples of the hospice, functioning seamlessly. Families arrived at all hours, punching codes or scanning caretaker badges, never hindered. Ms. K updated Ms. Duval occasionally with budget requests, always modest, well within the philanthropic endowment. The old door-latching sabotage was rarely mentioned, except as a cautionary anecdote about protecting vulnerable spaces from malevolent acts. Karen's presence in the neighborhood all but vanished. She rarely posted on the forum. Rumors said she'd been ostracized by the crafters, the seniors, and even her old clique. Some rumored she was quietly listing her house, but no for sale signs appeared. Perhaps she realized any sabotage attempts were fruitless now. The building, bristling with cameras and locked sliding doors, offered no easy infiltration. The board, too, had threatened swift legal steps if further harm befell the hospice. Karen had lost her crusade and the respect of her peers. Ethan, Rosie, and other kids who'd once faced sabotage of their pond raft recognized parallels. In Elmwood Cove, malicious acts ironically spurred robust improvements, a boathouse for them, and now an advanced hospice door system for older or ill neighbors. In both cases, Karen's negativity was overshadowed by unstoppable communal unity. Ms. K found hope in that pattern, evil, ironically, fueling good. By this stage, Ms. K no longer feared the hospice wing's future. The board had codified it as a permanent fixture, praising the door system as a model of accessibility and security. Freed from malicious meddling, the hospice staff devoted themselves to patient care, forging an environment of love in life's final chapters. A year after the sabotage, Elmwood Cove stood as a testament to how negativity can inadvertently spark growth. The hospice wing, once overshadowed by a crudely glued door, now shone with sleek automatic sliding panels, a modern lounge, and a staff that felt safe from outside intrusion. The entire building radiated acceptance of life's full cycle, from children's play in the rec hall to gentle, dignified end-of-life care in the hospice corridor. Karen, effectively sidelined, had lost her final election attempt for any HOA position. She remained in her home, seldom venturing out or complaining. Rumors indicated she might quietly relocate to another region. Some neighbors felt no sadness, recalling the cruelty she inflicted on terminally ill patients. Yet others pitted her self-inflicted isolation. Ms. K believed if Karen ever realized the harm she caused, she might find redemption. But as of now, she seemed unrepentant, a footnote in Elmwood Cove's transformation. Life carried on. The crafters crocheted cheerful blankets for new hospice arrivals. Children's groups occasionally sang carols in the lounge, and Ms. K oversaw daily operations, grateful for the resources that replaced a once vulnerable door. No one else tried to sabotage the hospice. The synergy of staff, volunteers, and residents fostered an atmosphere so supportive that any intruder would face immediate condemnation. Occasionally, Ms. K recalled that dreadful morning discovering the door glued shut. She compared it to the present day, seeing how adversity spurred a safer, more robust solution. From heartbreak rose resilience. Under the unwavering hum of the automatic door, families found solace in their final farewells, free from fear that any neighbor's cruelty might intrude. In that sense, Karen's sabotage ironically formed part of the hospice's legacy, proof that destructive impulses can't dim the flame of compassion when a community stands together.